Hi, my name is Judith Graves, and I am here with KidLit Cove, and we are a group of 13 authors, picture book authors and illustrators from across Atlantic Canada. And where's that? Well, we're from Prince Edward Island, that's me, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and we don't have anyone from Newfoundland yet, so that would be awesome if we could get some talent from Newfoundland joining us. But today, it's not about KidLit Cove. We're interviewing AJB Johnston. Jay is right there. Yeah, there's his website. I'm just going to read through these slides for you guys. AJB, more commonly known as John or Jay. So if I call him John, then that's fair game. Grew up in Truro, Nova Scotia. He writes historical fiction, nonfiction, and museum exhibits. Many of his books and articles were written about Atlantic Canada, especially the Fortress of Louisbourg, which is beautiful and fun to go to. Led to France, making him, what did they make you, Jay?
Chevalier.
Of?
Which is a knight.
A knight,
of
okay.
The Order of Academic Laurels.
Excellent. And he also travels a lot. I do follow him on Instagram, and I love all of his photos of his travels. Here are some of his books. If you go to his website, you'll see all the others. There's lots. But today we're talking about Into the Wind, a novel of Acadian resilience, published by Acorn Press and about a middle grade level of reading, I would say. Here we go. We're talking to Jay. Hello.
Hi, Judith. How are you?
Good. Where are you right now?
I'm in the Wentworth Valley of Nova Scotia at a place called Folly Lake, in an old cabin that's been the family cottage for a long time. It's a simple A-frame, but we're about 50 feet from the lake, which is very nice.
Excellent. Jealous. So today I have some questions for you. Where did the idea come from for you for Into the Wind? Where did it all start?
Into the Wind started about 20 years ago as an idea, or maybe not even an idea, but rather a feeling. At the time, I was working on a brand new exhibit for the brand new visitor center at Grand-Pré, which was back around 2001, 2002. And a colleague of mine, Wayne Kirk, and I really did all the content for the building. And we talked about diking, we talked about war, we talked about Evangeline and how she came to be, all those kinds of topics. And then at one point, we decided we should do something that's just an audio experience for children, so that the visitors could listen on a phone. They would pick up, and they would experience what happened at Grand-Pré in 1755 through the eyes of two children, a boy and a girl. And Wayne and I each wrote several lines of dialogue for that, and that was it. Except that it wasn't it, because the idea stayed with me for a very long time, and over a period of next decade or more, 2 decades, I guess, I would pick away at this story of the two children and what they'd experienced at Grand-Pré. And eventually that's resulted in Into the Wind. But it didn't come quickly, it came slowly, and there were a variety of evolutions as I went along.
I did find this really interesting, the way you did this in the book. You did not reveal, I don't even think you said French or English, really. You didn't mention the language. No. You didn't mention, anything about place or setting. You just kind of dropped us in this world with these kids going through this experience. What prompted that decision?
That wasn't how when I started to write the story and place these two children and their family in the village, I named everything according to what it was historically. You know, Grand-Pré, and they were the British or New England soldiers that came. They were the Acadians. But then as I was thinking about it and looking at the world news on a regular basis and seeing a lot of immigrants and migrants and people being forced from their homes, it really dawned on me that this was a universal experience that has happened many times, not just in 1755 to Acadians. And so I decided I'd try to make it universal, and it would be a bit of a mystery to the readers. They wouldn't know where it was happening or who it was happening to. So I took out all the references, and it's just simply the village and the villagers, and then the soldiers arrive. And so people don't really know where or when it was. And then eventually I got to asking an artist to come up with a cover for the book, the cover that's the lovely cover that Leo Lowe produced, And of course, it had to be specific. You had to put clothes on people and so on. And so if you pick up the book, you can see sort of instantly it's 18th century clothing. So that gives you a clue. But just the story itself, the future could be in the long ago past. You don't really know where and when it's happening. And I think that makes it a more powerful story, more universal.
I agree. I'm just going to flip to the cover again there. Yeah, it is really striking. And of course, the hat is a huge element in the story. It's at the beginning and it's at the end with completely different context, which was really well done.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the hat is the symbol, if you like, for the resiliency of the people, and it gets battered, it gets torn, but it's always there and it survives. And in the end, the children send it on its way and with a better hope for the future.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was really moving, and especially how you are constantly raising the stakes. Things are confusing for the characters. People go missing, and then there's gunshots and what happened to their father. And yeah, it's a really good story. I loved it.
Thank you.
It made me angry. It made me sad.
It was, well, that's good. That's great. It was, every scene is either through the eyes of the 10-year-old boy or through the eyes of the 14-year-old girl. So that sometimes they overhear things, sometimes they spy on things, but they're in every piece. One or the other or both are in every scene. And it is bewildering, it is confusing. The adults too, they don't know what's going to happen to them. And even in the end, when they're sent on their way, they don't know where they're going and how long it's going to take and what that country's going to be. So there's a lot of uncertainty and confusion in it, but I think overall it's a very uplifting story, emphasizing the resiliency of these people.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, you follow them on their journey and how they're dealing with this situation, and they deal with it with, all the different emotions. How you have the mother who kind of checks out a little bit. You have the grandfather who's like really feels, he thinks he knows what's going on and it's not going to be good, and then, it's just, so you feel everything. And then in the end, it is hopeful in the end. So
yeah, it's just, my imagining, knowing the history, my imagining of what it must have felt like for those two children, and of course the rest of the village at the same time. So it was my attempt to try and make it very accessible to as many readers as possible.
Yeah, and it is a family. It's a brother and a sister, the parents and the grandfather. So it's a really good bonding. There's all the family ties and connections and drama that happens with families in there too.
Right. I like to think that Acadians will really respond to it, but people who are not Acadians, and I'm not, people from whatever corner of the world they live in, will be able to relate to the situation that they find themselves in, that are beyond their control. Absolutely. And they have to do their best to survive.
I agree. Last question. Speaking of hope, what is your hope for Into the Wind as it goes forth onto bookshelves?
Well, I've got a few. I'd love to see it read by as many people as possible, especially, school-age children, but their parents as well. Mostly I hear from adults who seem to respond to it very warmly. But I'd love to see it translated into French, so there'd be a French version, other languages as well, if possible. I think it would make an excellent film. I think of all my books, it's the one that I can sort of most easily visualize being turned into a film. And I'd love to see it sort of introduced in some manner into the different school systems so that middle grade kids, maybe across the country or across the province of Nova Scotia, would have it as a resource when the topic of the deportation of the Acadians comes up. This would be one way I think they could read a book and really relate to what happened to the people back then.
I would agree.
Those are my main hopes.
And those are good hopes. As a former elementary school library technician, I know that this book would find its place easily on the shelves, and it would be one that teachers could read to students, or students would would take home and read. There's definitely a lot of action in it and suspense and like you root for the characters. So it's all in there.
Great. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Judith. Great to hear that.
Yeah. One thing, this is a random question, we can keep it in if you know the answer, but when we moved here to Prince Edward Island, we saw a lot of houses with stars on them. And we were like, oh, those stars are really neat. That's kind of cool. And then we found out that the star is an Acadian symbol. So do you have them, like, is that all over the Atlantic provinces? I haven't seen the stars before.
It's something that you see a lot now. In the last 20, 30 years, it's become very common in all the Acadian regions. PEI has several Acadian regions. New Brunswick has a very big Acadian population. But you see it in Nova Scotia as well. It's because of the flag. The Acadian flag was adopted by the Acadians in 1881, well after the period that Into the Wind talks about, 100 and some years later. That's when the Acadian flag came along. It's the French flag, but with a star, and the star stands for the Stella Maris, the Star of Mary of the Sea, and so it's the symbol of Acadia ever since the late 1800s.
See, and so I knew you were the one to ask. I knew you'd know the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was just a random, but thank you for answering that. You did send me some photos that I would like to run through, and then maybe we could talk about what they are. So here we go, the first one.
You can see that's the setting at Grand-Pré, one of the prettiest settings anywhere in Canada, certainly within Nova Scotia. You see Cape Blomidon in the background, which gets in the story Into the Wind. At times they talk about the Red Cape in the background. Church is there in the foreground to the left, and it's the reconstructed memorial church that was built in the 1900s by Acadians to mark their presence. In the story Into the Wind, in the reality of the 18th century, the church didn't look like that. We don't know exactly what it looked like. We do know it was made of wood and that it was much larger, because that church wouldn't hold the over 400 Acadians, men and boys, who were crowded into there. So it was a bigger and a wooden church, but roughly in the same spot. The vantage point that the photo is taken from is up on the hill. And in the story Into the Wind, you learn that the villagers all live along the hillside, and they descend to go down to the church, which then becomes the sort of palisaded fort when the soldiers arrive in the town. So it's a beautiful setting, but it's a very evocative one when you know the history of all that's happened there.
Right. And yeah, so just to explain a little bit about that part, the soldiers come and they divide all the boys and men are put in this church, and they don't know what's going to happen to them. So it's really tense.
That's right. And the boys were 10 and up.
10 and up.
So Charles, the 10-year-old in this, makes the cutoff to go in and hear the news. And they don't know what the news is going to be,
right,
but they find out.
And I really liked how he desperately wanted to be a soldier until he gets a taste of some of the reality.
Until he saw the reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next photo we have.
This is a classic shot of there's Evangeline, the statue of Evangeline in the foreground, and then the memorial church in the background. And both of these elements were site by, the DAR, the Dominion Atlantic Railway, added the statue, and then the Acadian community added the church. And they're sort of the symbols of the Grand-Pré setting. So there's a bust of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Was installed at the park at Grand-Pré in 1955 by the Nova Scotia government. And Longfellow's the author of the poem Evangeline, Tale of Acadian, and it became a worldwide sensation. It was translated into many, many languages, was known and loved by people around the world, and it helped turn Grand-Pré into a tourist attraction in the early part of the 20th century. People would come especially by trains and later by car, and would come in large numbers to see the place where Evangeline had lived. Evangeline was not a real person, but rather a fictional heroine. And that photo has me as a young boy visiting that site with my parents in 1955, the year that it was installed there.
Right.
So very early on in my life, I was at Grand-Pré and beginning to feel the appeal of its story.
And this is the Evangeline again. And so it's a story. Evangeline, the poem, is about Evangeline and her fiance, but they get
That's
separated.
Right.
Yeah.
Gabrielle, they get
Gabrielle.
separated. They're on the eve of their wedding, and they get separated. And the rest of the poem is, and they both get deported and removed, but to different places. And the rest of the poem is about Evangeline going all across what's now the United States, trying to find and reconnect with her fiance. There's a bunch of artwork that Wayne Kerr and I and Parks Canada had done for the new visitor center. It's not new anymore, but it was at the time, new visitor center at Grand-Pré. And this is showing the men and boys being marched off to the ships. They're separated first, and they're separated from their families, who in some cases will never see again. So all of that artwork, some of it I'd forgotten about, but it had obviously made a big impression on me, because some of those scenes that are depicted are actually in the novel. And in many cases, I'd forgotten about the artwork, but it had been in my subconscious, I guess, so that I set some of the scenes in the very settings that we depict in the visitor center.
Right. There's one last photo here.
Yeah, this is an interpretation of where the British or the New England Army came and established their palisade wall, their wooden fortification wall. They took over the church, built a palisade around it, and made it like a fort. And then it was into that church that the men and boys were separated on September 5th for the announcement. And then the villagers, you can see at the top of that image, Grand-Pré village, that's up the hill. And that's where they lived along the hill in sort of scattered houses. So it depicts where all this drama plays out in the novel.
National Acadian Day is coming up on the 15th. Yes, August 15th.
15th of August.
Yeah.
And I was asked to speak on that day in Truro, which is near to where I am right now, Truro, Nova Scotia. And I hope people are going to come and hear about the background to the story, and I'll do some readings from the book. And I'm hoping to do some other presentations and talks around the Maritimes over the months to come. So I'm looking forward to that.
That's excellent. Yeah, because it's so neat to hear the history. You know, you can just fill in all the gaps if people have questions. It's amazing.
Yeah, I love talking to people, live people in a room. It's nothing quite like it.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, so dun, dun, I think that's it for us today. I love the book. I have my copy here. Can I? Yeah, it's great. It's lovely. I know it will be well received in schools and libraries, and I can't wait till it goes into the wind.
Excellent. Thanks for your interest, Judith.
Yeah, thanks so much for talking with me.